Hello everybody! Today we're going to talk about session 25. And session 25 is kind of a short one because Carla is sick. And we're going to talk about that. So let's go ahead and get started. I am Ra. I greet you in the love and the light of the infinite creator. We communicate now. Questioner. Asking first what cause or complex of causes has led to the instrument's chest cold, as it is called. I am Ra. This distortion towards illness was caused by the free will of the instrument in accepting a chemical substance which you call LSD. This was carefully planned by those entities which do not desire this instrument to remain viable. The substance has within it the faculty of removing large stores of vital energy from the ingester. The first hope of the Orion entity which arranged this opportunity was that this instrument would become less polarized toward what you call the positive. Due to conscious efforts upon the part of this instrument, using the substance as a programmer for service to others and thankfulness, this instrument was spared this distortion and there was no result satisfactory to the Orion group. The second hope lay in the possible misuse of the most powerful means of transmission of energy between your peoples in the area of body complex distortions. We have not previously spoken of the various types of energy blockages and transfers, positive and negative, that may take place due to participation in your sexual reproductive complex of actions. This entity, however, is a very strong entity with very little distortion from universal green ray love energy. Thus, this particular plan was not affected either, as the entity continued to give of itself in this context in an open or green ray manner rather than attempting to receive or to manipulate other self. The only remaining distortion available, since this entity would not detune and would not cease sharing love universally under this chemical substance, was simply to drain this entity of as much energy as possible. This entity has a strong distortion towards busyness, which it has been attempting to overcome for some time, realizing it not to be the appropriate attitude for this work. In this particular area, the ingestion of this substance did indeed, shall we say, cause distortions away from viability due to the busyness and the lack of desire to rest, this instrument staying alert for much longer than appropriate. Thus, much vital energy was lost, making this instrument unusually susceptible to infections such as it now experiences. Okay, so, firstly, this is saying that Carla is sick because of the LSD. And why is that? Well, the LSD was given to her by a friend, and this was actually carefully planned by negative entities who wanted to harm the raw contact. Carla says at another place, in another book, that she had never taken LSD before, despite, growing up, coming of age in the 60s, essentially, that no one had ever really offered it to her. So this was really the first time she had been offered LSD, and she was very, very curious. So she ended up taking 2 doses over 2 days, and she used it to program love of the creator and thankfulness. Her and Jim had sex while she was on it, but she wasn't disturbed from her usual green ray configuration in that regard or in the universal love regard for all other beings. But they were able to use the fact that LSD makes you feel very energized against Carla. And she stayed up, I want to say she stayed up for 24 hours. I think she stayed up for a full day. And I know she says that she used that energy to rearrange her office, which is something that she really loved to do to organize her working space. So this drained a whole lot of her vital energy and made her weak in that regard, which made her susceptible to this illness. So this was the third and least desire of the Orion entities who planned for her to take this during the raw contact, but they were still able to throw a wrench into the raw contact by lining up this opportunity for her to take the LSD and then using her distortion towards busyness to encourage her to negate the need for rest. And therefore they drained a bunch of her vital energy. And we will see that this issue of Carla's lowered vital energy persists for at least 3 months, as Ra will clarify in a few upcoming sessions. But, I'm of the opinion, the potential opinion, that she really never recovered from this. She never regained physical strength after this. She was always very prone towards physical weakness. But in the beginning sessions, she was kind of gaining a lot more strength. And Dawn did note that a few sessions ago, that she's feeling stronger after these sessions instead of weaker after these sessions. But after this illness that she has as a consequence of the LSD, I don't think she really feels strong like that again for the rest of the contact. And these upcoming subsequent sessions are much shorter because of her lack of vital energy. So the Orion entities who laid this plan did create some problems for the group, and that's really unfortunate. And I think it's a good, important point to be aware and consider the fact that negative entities can be the driver of coincidences and synchronicities. Okay, just because it feels divinely orchestrated doesn't mean it's coming from the positive polarity of the divine, because the divine is positive and negative. The divine contains both. And as Ra says much, much later, when we're talking about the archetypes, that both the negative portions of the deep mind and the positive portions of the deep mind invite and await the reaching. You're given opportunities to make the choice over and over and over again. So this LSD is so potent, it really created a lot of opportunities for choice within Carla, and she made service to others' choices, except in regards to her own physical body complex, which has always been her weakness. She's always been willing to sacrifice her physical body in the pursuit of service to others, seeing others outside of herself. When the whole thing is that you are also the others. You still have to serve yourself in a loving way because you are the creator. If you are cracking the whip over your own body, that's still cracking the whip over somebody's body. Even if it's yours, even if you're making that choice, you're still putting those demands on yourself and pushing yourself beyond your limits, and that's not compassionate. So they found the chink, and they were able to then give her a series of tests, and the consequences ended up being that she weakened her body and shortened several of the Ra contact sessions, shortened the time that could be, the potential time that could be allowed for Ra to be channeled through her. So she says too that she doesn't regret taking this LSD. She felt really good, obviously, on the LSD, and she actually didn't have any trips. I think I mentioned this before. She didn't actually hallucinate when she was on the LSD. She just felt really, really good. But luckily, she made the decision then to not take any more LSD because her body was not able to handle the intensity of energies that the LSD pulls through you. And here too, Ra brings up sexual energy transfers, which of course we will talk about much more in the future. So I won't dive into that now, but essentially her and Jim are having sex, and Jim is able to transfer energy to her. And as long as they're having a green ray energy transfer, they transfer energy to each other. And Jim is giving her energy, and that is really one of the backbones as we go forward to the Ra contact, because of Carla's innate lack of energy, a lack of physical and vital energy. Jim is able to pour into her this way and help facilitate the Ra contact. It's a very, very important aspect of how this triad is working and calling Ra through them. So yeah, I think that's very interesting that Ra says that it was negative beings who laid this plan. And I think based upon, It's really hard to find purely positive trip experiences involving LSD, especially because it is such a potent drug. Most people have, I would say, a mixed experience. And I would say most people probably feel like Carla, not most people, a lot of people feel like Carla and don't regret it, even if they have some kind of scary things happen to them while they're hallucinating. But I think in general, the experience is usually pretty chaotic for most people. I've never taken LSD. I have taken shrooms a handful of times in my life, and I don't have any bad experiences from that. I never had anything scary or out of control happen to me doing that. I think it's a lot easier to properly dose on mushrooms. It's hard to eat a large amount of mushrooms. I mean, nowadays you can, because you can get them like in little pills and swallow them, but still, you know what dose you're taking if that's the case most of the time. Whereas LSD, a lot of the time you don't have a dose, or you don't know the dose, or it's been, created by people who don't know the dose. It's really volatile. So if you do feel called to taking hallucinogenic drugs, I'm just going to put that disclaimer here to be very careful and to use your intentions, to use your choice, to use it to program the desire to serve others. Try not to use it to program a desire to meet entities, or to see a UFO or something like that, because there's no polarity in that desire as it stands on its own. So you might have entities show up, but they aren't going to be entities who want to serve. And that's something too that Ross says about LSD in session 6, that these types of drugs can make random holes in your energy body where any entity can plug into those holes and then create even more distortions in your mind, your body, or your spirit. So in 25.2, Dawn says, the second question the instrument requested was, how may I best revitalize myself, not only now, but in the future? I am Ra. This instrument is aware of the basic needs of its constitution, those being meditation, acceptance of limitations, experiences of joy through association with others and with the beauty as of the singing, and the exercising with great contact, whenever possible, with the life forces of second density, especially those of trees. This entity also needing to be aware of the moderate but steady intake of foodstuffs, exercise being suggested at a fairly early portion of the day and at a later portion of the day before resting. So, these are the things that restore vital energy. And I believe I've maybe talked about it before. I'm sorry again if I'm repeating myself, my sincere apologies. But it's my understanding that vital energy is built when we use the mind, the body, and the spirit all at once, essentially. So when we're using our physical vehicle, our conscious choices to contact the spirit, to be in contact with our spirit, to engage in connection with the divine. So, and I think this advice is pretty good for most people, though I think there are things very specific to Carla here. Meditation, obviously, helps everyone. Meditating every day, immensely helpful. Acceptance of limitations, helps everybody. Experiences of joy through association with others. I think most of us, I think people are introverted. Some people don't want to interact with other people, but specifically the experiences of joy through association with others, I think there are very few people who would be drained by that experience, as long as everybody's, and it has a joyful atmosphere and everyone's being congenial and friendly and not draining each other of energy, which is, I think, what introverts are very sensitive to, but a joyful association with others. And this part, I think, is very specific to Carla, but I do think, it can be specific to a lot of people too. The beauty as of the singing. So Carla loved to sing worship songs. She was always a part of her church choir. She loved it so much. It made her feel so full of joy. So I think Not everybody loves music or is that kind of connected to music, but if you are, I think you understand what it feels like to have music that just uplifts you and makes you feel connected to the divine. That's very powerful, so engage with that if you feel that way. And then Ross says, exercising with great contact whenever possible with the life forces of second density, especially those of trees. So being out in nature, exercising out in nature is really very beneficial to revitalizing the body. And at a later point too, I think after they move at some point, Ross talking about Carla's exercise regimen and how there aren't as many trees around and there's more people around. And so this isn't ideal for her. And as far as revitalizing her, nearly as much as if it was more out in nature that she was able to exercise. So if you do have access to that as well, I know not everybody is privileged enough to live outside of a city, but if you have somewhere within your city that has more trees, more second density life, that you can go and exercise your body, that's very beneficial. This entity also needing to be aware of its moderate but steady intake of foodstuffs. That one is kind of specific because Carla's supposed to be eating more because the raw contact is like a physical exertion. So she needs to take in extra calories because she's spending a lot of calories doing the raw contact, even though it feels like she's just sleeping. And then exercise at a fairly early portion of the day and a later portion of the evening, in the evening before resting. So that also, I think, probably is beneficial to everybody, but Carla in particular, because she has such a weak body complex, she needs to exercise regularly to help build up her endurance, her physical endurance. So all of these things I think could be beneficial to everyone as long as you don't have a huge rejection of these things. But these are the things that Ra could comment on because Carla knew in her conscious mind somewhere that these were important to her well-being and feeling physically strong and capable. So then in 25.3, Dawn says, the third question that she requested to be asked was, how may Dawn and Jim help to revitalize me? I am Ra. This is not an appropriate question for full answer. We can only say that these entities are most conscientious. We may add that due to this instrument's distortion towards imbalance in the space-time nexus, it would be well were this entity accompanied during exercise. So, Dawn and Jim do a good job, and Ra can't explicitly say the things that they should or could do that would help revitalize Carla, because, again, that's advice that would change the future. But they do say that she should be accompanied while she exercises, and I do think that this persists throughout the rest of the contact, that Ra suggests that she's not alone when she's exercising because of potential physical complications that might happen when she's exerting herself. So 25.4, Dawn says, thank you. We shall now continue with the material from yesterday. You stated that about 3,000 years ago, the Orion group left due to diaspora. Was the Confederation then able to make any progress after the Orion group left? I am Ra. For many of your centuries, both the Confederation and the Orion Confederation busied themselves with each other upon planes above your own, shall we say, planes in time-space, whereby machinations were conceived and the armor of light girded on. Battles have been and are continuing to be fought upon these levels. Upon the Earth plane, energies had been set in motion, which did not cause a great deal of call. There were isolated instances of callings, one such taking place beginning approximately 2600 of your years in the past in what you would call Greece at this time, and resulting in writings and understandings of some facets of the Law of One. We especially note the one known as Thales and the one known as Heraclitus, those being of the philosopher career, as you may call it, teaching their students. We also point out the understandings of the one known as Pericles. At this time, there was a limited amount of visionary information which the Confederation was allowed to telepathically impress. However, for the most part, during this time, empires died and rose according to the attitudes and energies set in motion long ago, not resulting in strong polarization, but rather in that mixture of the positive and the warlike or negative, which has been characteristic of this final minor cycle of your beingness. So after the Orion group left, we were very mixed polarity. We didn't have a lot of seeking for information, so the Confederation wasn't really able to reach out to us very often. However, they do mention that in 600 BC or so in Greece, that there were philosophers who were able to receive some information in regards to the Law of One and write that down for us to read in the future and for people to read at that time. But it was a limited amount of information that the Confederation was able to give because the calling wasn't very strong. And I actually, until I read this again here, right before I recorded, I'd forgotten these names that Ra had mentioned, at least in the short term here. But I do remember them because these are Ionians, is the school that these men participated in. And I'm familiar with that because I'm a great big fan of Carl Sagan's Cosmos, which, if you haven't watched, I highly recommend. It's a wonderful piece of media. And he has a whole segment on these Ionians and how profound their work was in creating our modern day ways of thinking. And now, Carl Sagan, I love him to death. My child's name is Sagan, but Carl Sagan is very anti-woo, let's say. I don't want to say anti-metaphysics, but he's very anti-woo. He's very anti-magical thinking, and he isn't one to give much energy to things that cannot be proven by science. Those are his limitations. He's still an incredible genius and had so much deep thoughts to share with us. And it's really interesting because the Cosmos show highlights many great thinkers over time. And I think a lot of these beings were likely to be wanderers because they were so above and beyond what normal humans were capable of doing and were bringing in these great scientific discoveries. And he felt the need to highlight a lot of these beings, these men. Obviously, most of them were men, but once in a while we have a woman in there. But these people who were able to change our world with scientific thought. So I do think that's really interesting. But I actually haven't read anything that these gentlemen have written down, though I'm sure it's pretty interesting. And, they laid the groundwork for the philosophers that we give a lot of credit to, like Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, because these guys came shortly after this 600 BC time frame that Ra's giving. So maybe someday I will dive into these writings, because it is not very often that Ra gives specific names of people in our history, but these are apparently ones who received some information from the Confederation, although there was a limited amount of visionary information which the Confederation was allowed to telepathically impress, as Ra says here. So, and then of course here in this answer too, Ra says that the Confederation and Orion were battling in time-space. And so Dawn's going to continue to ask about that here as we go forward. In 25.5, Dawn says, "You spoke of an Orion Confederation and a battle being fought between the Confederation and the Orion Confederation. Is it possible to convey any attempt of how this battle is fought? I am Ra. Picture, if you will, your mind. Picture it then in total unity with all other minds of your society. You are then single-minded, and that which is a weak electrical charge in your physical illusion is now an enormously powerful machine whereby thoughts may be projected as things. In this endeavor, the Orion group charges or attacks the Confederation with arms of light. The result, a standoff, as you would call it, both energies being somewhat depleted by this and needing to regroup, the negative depleted through failure to manipulate, the positive depleted through failure to accept that which is given." So, again, we're going to go forward and talk about this more. This is happening in time-space. It's happening mostly in fourth density. So in fourth density, we have a group mind, where we are able to channel a single thought through the group mind which becomes an immensely powerful thing. So they're engaging in this thought-based warfare where they're generating attacks and defense via thought. And there's more to say about that, but I'm just going to go forward and let Ra explain it more before I pre-explain what Ra's about to explain. So, 25.6, Dawn asks, could you amplify the meaning of what you said by failure to accept that which is given? I am Ra. At the level of time-space at which this takes place in the form of what you may call thought war, the most accepting and loving energy would be to so love those who wish to manipulate that those entities were surrounded, engulfed, and transformed by positive energies. This, however, being a battle of equals, the Confederation is aware that it cannot, on equal footing, allow itself to be manipulated in order to remain purely positive. For then, though pure, it would not be of any consequence, having been placed by the so-called powers of darkness under the heel, as you may say. It is thus that those who deal with this thought war must be defensive rather than accepting in order to preserve their usefulness in service to others. Thusly, they cannot fully accept what the Orion Confederation wishes to give, that being enslavement. Thusly, some polarity is lost due to this friction, and both sides, if you will, must then regroup. It has not been fruitful for either side. The only consequence which has been helpful is a balancing of the energies available to this planet so that these energies have less necessity to be balanced in this space-time, thus lessening the chances of planetary annihilation. So, I think this is a really big answer from Ra about how, as a positive being, you can't, even in third density, I think this applies. You need to accept and you need to surrender, but you can't surrender to every whim that a negative entity wishes of you, because then ultimately you just become their puppet. Even if you convince yourself, well, I'm serving others, I'm serving this negative being, you're still surrendering your free will. You're giving up your free will, and you're giving your energy to this more powerful being. Ultimately, if you start off on equal footing, but if you allow them to put you under their heel, then they become more powerful than you, and then they get to use you in whatever way they want. So, it's necessary to be defensive in this way when the Orion entities are directly attacking and trying to manipulate, and to not just surrender and accept your fate, because then you lose your autonomy. You lose your ability to choose how to direct your service to others' energy. Instead, you just give it to one negative being. And you see this all the time everywhere. I think it's a big way that our society functions, is a lot of beings allow themselves to be controlled by the will of others in the name of service, in the name of less friction. And I'm not saying that's always the wrong choice, but when it becomes a habit, or when you're deferring to one specific entity who is constantly using you and draining you, you lose your potency, you lose your potential. So for just one example, if you look at a lot of modern day cults, you have this entity at the head of the cult who ultimately has goals of power over others and is doing what they can to feel that power over others. And a lot of the time, the others are genuinely service to others beings, and they see this higher figure who seems closer to the divine than they are in certain ways, and they want to serve that entity, but they don't have the discernment to really see, or they make excuses for the times when this higher entity is doing things that are harmful to others. But they're still willing to serve that being because they think, again, that that being is closer to God than they are. They see the divine within that polarized being, but they don't understand that there are two poles, that you can polarize toward the negative aspect of the divine, and you can polarize toward the positive aspect of the divine. People who are relatively unpolarized or less polarized only see the divinity. They don't see the polarity. So that's one really big reason why building up your polarity is so important, because you gain the awareness to recognize polarity in and of itself, to see, oh, this being has a lot of power, and talks about God all the time, talks about the Creator, but their choices and the way that they manifest this power aren't really serving anyone but themselves. And it's really easy to miss that when you are embroiled in it. It's easy to make justifications, it's easy to make excuses. It's easy to say, oh, but they are helping us. They have built this commune for us, and they give us these amazing teachings and all of these things, but without the awareness that, oh, they're only doing that so that they have power over you. They have to put bait in the trap, let's say, to get you into their web. Sorry, I just put two metaphors together, but I think you know what I'm saying. So here in the light realms, we have Confederation and Orion battling each other out, and the Confederation has to be defensive. They know there isn't any deceiving of the self, that what the Orion entities are doing is for a greater good. So they have to defend themselves, and then this makes them ultimately, in the short term, lose polarity from not accepting what is happening to them. And then they have to regroup. And so I think that is part of, again, third and fourth density, is this kind of bouncing back from these thought wars, right? The important thing I think too here is that while nobody in fourth density is getting ahead via this thought war, they are helping to balance the energies so that they aren't manifesting in our space-time and ultimately ending up as planetary annihilation. So thank you to those Confederation members who are engaging in this thought war, because things could be a lot worse here if they weren't. I believe that's what we're all saying. So 25.7, Dawn says, very important point, I believe. Does a portion of the Confederation then engage in this thought battle? What percentage engages? I am Ra. This is the most difficult work of the Confederation. Only 4 planetary entities at any one time are asked to partake in this conflict. Questioner, what density are these 4 planetary entities? I am Ra. These entities are of the density of love, numbering 4. Questioner, then I am assuming this is the most effective density for this work. Would this density, an entity of this density, be more effective for this type of work than, say, an entity of density 5 or 6? I am Ra. The 4th density is the only density besides your own which, lacking the wisdom to refrain from battle, sees the necessity of the battle. Thus it is necessary that 4th density social memory complexes be used. So 4 4th density positive social memory complexes are engaged in this thought war at any time. So sounds like they cycle out and take a break from doing this. And Ross says that 3rd and 4th density are the only densities which see the necessity of the battle. In 5th density, we sort of distance ourselves from this type of work. But I do think this is a really important thing to internalize as 3rd density entities. We're moving into 4th. Of course, we all want to be 5th or 6th density activated. However, being defensive against attacks is still a 4th density energy. And I think that's something a lot of people struggle with when they're studying these metaphysical principles. They think that you need to accept everything, to be perfectly loving all of the time, to turn your head if you see violence, and really defending the self, defending others against this violence is still a positively polarizing choice. You can do this through the open heart. It can be your compassion that compels you to take this defensive stance. So I think that's something really important to think about. Ra mentions this a little bit into the future as well when talking about Jesus, actually, that to defend the loved one is still a desire that persists into 4th density. So if you feel those types of feelings, those aren't necessarily an imbalance from the 3rd density incarnated self who is trying to learn how to open the heart again. It's a totally loving desire. It may not be the most wise desire, but it still can be a loving desire. So 2510, Dawn says, am I correct in assuming, then, that fourth density on both sides of both of the Orion and the Confederation sides are in this battle, and that the densities 5th and 6th on the Orion side do not engage in this? Is this correct? I am Ra. This will be the last full question, as this entity's energies are low. It is partially correct. 5th and 6th density entities positive would not partake in this battle. 5th density negative would not partake in this battle. Thus, the 4th density of both orientations join in this conflict. May we ask for a few short questions before we close? So, Dawn's asking about 5th and 6th density negative, and Ra affirms that 5th density negative does not partake in the battle, but omits mentioning 6th density negative. So I think it's to be assumed that 6th density negative, social memory complexes, beings, whatever, are participating in this battle in some way. And I think that's really interesting because there isn't very far to go into 6th density before you have to switch your polarity for a negative being. And so there isn't much space there, but I think ultimately you could spend as much time there as you want, because time is an illusion. But the 6th density entities ultimately just hitting a brick wall over and over, the more that they choose to remain in 6th density as a negative being. So I think it's really interesting that they then go back to 4th density, and they work a lot within the 4th density realm because they're stuck. There's nowhere for them to go. They can't go forward into 6th density. So they're going, quote unquote, backwards to do this work in 4th density. But I think that's what we're supposed to take from this answer. So, 2511, Dawn says, well, I will first ask the answer at the end if there's anything we can do to make the instrument really comfortable. I'll only ask the questions that this instrument has, or answer the questions that the instrument has energy left to give. But I really would like to know the orientation of 5th density negative for not participating in this battle. I am Ra. The 5th density is the density of light or wisdom. The so-called negative service-to-self entity in this density is at an high level of awareness and wisdom, and has ceased activity except by thought. The 5th density negative is extraordinarily compacted and separated from all else. So, the 5th density negative they have their own desires. They don't have any sort of collective desires. Whereas 4th density, Orion, they're participating in this battle, they're helping each other out, they're trying to take over Earth. They have these whims that a 5th density negative entity does not desire to participate in. They have their own agenda, their own things that they want to do in a very specific way. For instance, as we find out much later, there is a 5th density negative entity that's trying to disturb the Ra contact, and they're very focused on this, and it's taking a lot of their attention and energy to try to find chinks in the armor of this group to try to stop the Ra contact. So I think their quote-unquote missions are a lot more specific and personal than this planetary thought war that is occurring in 4th density. Whereas, again, I think the negative 6th density entity has run out of things to do. Ultimately, there's nowhere else for them to go except for backwards. But the 5th density entity is still increasing its wisdom, still figuring out how to do that. And this thought war battle isn't very wise because nobody's winning. So, final question, 25.12. Dawn says, thank you very much. We do not wish to deplete the instrument, so is there anything that we can do to make the instrument more comfortable? I am Ra. You are very conscientious. As we requested previously, it would be well to observe the angles taken by the more upright posture of the entity. It is causing some nerve blockage in the portion of the body complex called the elbows. I am Ra. I leave you in the love and the light of the one infinite Creator. Go forth then, rejoicing in the power and the peace of the one Creator, Adonai. So, at the end of session 25, Ra had already suggested that Carla is careful when she's sitting, and here apparently she's sitting in an improper way. It's causing problems with her elbows, and so she needs to be more aware of her body, her posture, when she's sitting upright. And so that is session 25. Very abbreviated, only 12 questions. It might be the shortest session. I don't know. I don't know the facts and the details about those things, but I feel like 12 questions and answers might be the shortest amount of questions and answers we have. So, but there's some really interesting things in there. And again, we just keep building and building. And Don's doing a really good job of untangling all of the things that Ra is saying to him, because there's so much. There's so many things to think about and consider and put into the proper place. And, ultimately, though, Don does really know a lot of this already. If you read Secrets of the UFO, which was written several years before they made contact with Ra, you see that Don knew a lot of this stuff, even when he's asking questions. And Ra says that later, like, we find it interesting that you choose to ask for confirmation more than asking for new questions, but that's okay. We're okay with that. But yeah, Don is really just kind of affirming a lot of things that he already does know. But I do think the whole Orion Confederation battle is pretty new ground for him. He's sort of trying to integrate this awareness that there are negative aliens and there are positive aliens, and they're battling. They're fighting over us, essentially. So, yeah, I think that's a pretty good session, even though it was short. So, I will keep doing my best, working on this project, getting done what I can, and sharing it with all of you who are listening. Thank you again so much. I really appreciate all of you. So grateful to have people to share the love of this material with, and I'm so grateful for our creator for giving us a reality with so much potential love and gratitude to discover, right? Because it's hidden, it's buried, we have to find it. That's so exciting. So thank you all. I will see you in session 26. Have a good one, and thank you.